It's strange, how the most life-altering moments often begin with the most ordinary of things. I wasn't expecting anything to change that day. Nothing in my routine screamed turning point. But there I was, walking through the park, my heart heavy with thoughts that seemed too big to carry. I had just gotten off the phone with him, and for the first time in a long while the conversation felt different. There was a crack in his voice, something I couldn't place, but it wasn't something I could ignore. He was my best friend, my confidant, my everything except the one thing I had always wished he could be. That night the air was thick with unspoken things. We met 2 years ago, back when we both thought we knew who we were and where we were going. At first, he was just the guy who sat next to me in our literature class. The one who made me laugh in ways I hadn't laughed in years. The one whose warmth felt like home. We started sharing late-night talks, confiding about everything, our favorite books, our crushes, our anxieties. It was easy, so easy. But for me, it went beyond easy. Somewhere between those late nights and spontaneous coffee shop hangs, I realized I was falling for him. I had convinced myself it was nothing, just a phase, a passing feeling. He was straight after all. He had always talked about girls about her, and I was just his friend, just his friend. That's all I would ever be. But that evening when I walked through that park, the weight of his words hung in the air. I had asked him a simple question, "How are you really?" And for the first time he had hesitated. I could tell something was wrong, but I never could have predicted what would come next. His response, soft and broken, shook me to my core. "I'm lost. I don't know where to go from here." The words lingered, an ache deep in my chest, because I knew it wasn't just about his life or his future or anything that could be explained away. No, it was something deeper, something I wasn't ready for. But what truly rattled me wasn't the vulnerability in his voice. It was that in the silence that followed, I realized that I, too, had been lost. I hadn't just been his friend for all this time. I had been holding my breath, waiting for something to shift, something to break free. I felt my heart race, the fear of losing him choking me. I thought about telling him, about confessing everything. But just as quickly as that thought arrived, a voice inside me whispered, "What if this is it? What if you're not just his friend anymore?" Then a text lit up my phone. "Meet me, now." He didn't say where. He didn't need to. I knew exactly where he meant, the place we had always gone to when things were too heavy to handle. I had no idea what I was about to walk into, but my legs carried me there anyway, because in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about friendship anymore. Something was changing, something monumental. And the truth, as terrifying as it was just beginning to unravel. When I arrived, he was already sitting on the worn bench by the old fountain, his face illuminated by the dim glow of the streetlight overhead. His shoulders were slumped in a way I'd never seen before, broken, vulnerable, something I never thought I'd witness in him. I had always seen him as invincible, the person who could hold it all together, always the one who knew the right thing to say. But now, there was a fragility to him that made me feel both scared and protective, like I had to step into a role I wasn't prepared for. I sat down next to him, the air thick with tension, and for a moment neither of us spoke. We just stared at the ripples in the water, both of us lost in our own worlds. It wasn't until he finally turned to me, his eyes red and puffy, that I knew this moment wasn't going to be like all the others. "I don't know what's wrong with me," he said quietly, voice cracking as though the words physically hurt to say. "I can't figure it out. It's like everything's falling apart and I don't know how to stop it." I wanted to reach out, to pull him into my arms and promise him everything would be okay, but I knew that wasn't what he needed. The truth was, I had been carrying the weight of my own feelings for so long that I wasn't sure if I could even be the friend he needed in that moment. How could I comfort him when I couldn't even comfort myself? But then he did something I never expected. He took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly, and looked directly into my eyes. I think I might be in love with you," he confessed, and the words hit me like a freight train. My heart stopped. I felt the blood rush to my head as my entire world tilted on its axis. The world around us, the park, the fountain, the streetlight, everything melted away until there was only him. And suddenly, everything I had ever kept hidden inside me, every confession I had buried deep down for months, exploded into the open. All this time, I had been afraid to admit it to myself, but hearing those words from him, he was saying the thing I had been terrified to believe. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I felt my heart hammering in my chest, my breath shallow as I tried to process what was happening. Was this real? Was he really saying what I thought he was saying, or had I misunderstood? In the silence that followed, I could feel his gaze on me, waiting, hoping for a response. But the truth was, I didn't know what to say. I had spent so long pretending that I was okay with being his just a friend, that I never let myself believe that this moment could come. But now, it was happening, and I was terrified. Terrified because I didn't know how to handle it. Terrified because, despite all the signs, I wasn't sure if I was ready to face the reality of what being with him would mean. And then, almost as if my mind couldn't hold onto the uncertainty any longer, I blurted out, "I feel the same way." The words felt foreign on my tongue, but they were true. And in that moment, everything shifted. The air between us was electric, charged with something neither of us had known how to name until now. And just as quickly as the weight of the moment settled in, he leaned in, his breath warm against my cheek, and kissed me. Tentatively at first, like he was still unsure, still asking for permission. I didn't pull away. Instead, I kissed him back, and in that one kiss, everything I had ever wanted, everything I had buried deep inside for so long, came rushing to the surface. I wasn't just his friend anymore, and he wasn't just mine. The world didn't stop after that kiss. If anything, it only seemed to speed up, everything around us blurring as if we were caught in a whirlwind of emotions neither of us had ever been prepared for. For the first time, it felt like we were no longer just two people sharing moments and pretending nothing was ever out of reach. We were something more, something real. But the moment we pulled apart, there was a shift, a deep, palpable fear in his eyes. "What happens now?" he whispered, his voice trembling as if the weight of his own question threatened to crush him. I didn't have an answer. I wanted to give him one, wanted to tell him that we could face this together, that we'd figure it out, but the truth was, I was terrified. All the doubts I had ignored came rushing to the forefront, demanding attention. What if we lost everything? What if being more than friends ruined what we had? What if he wasn't actually ready for this and I had misread everything? What if, in the end, we were just two people destined to be stuck in a cycle of longing and heartache? And then, like a slap to the face, a message popped up on my phone and my heart sank. It was from her, the girl he had been seeing before everything changed. The girl he had talked about endlessly, the girl whose name had always come up in our conversations like a ghost that neither of us could escape. "I need to talk. Can we meet?" it read. The words felt like ice, freezing me in place. I stared at the screen, my fingers numb against the phone as my heart tried to process the mess of feelings inside me. The girl, the one he was supposed to love, the one who had never really been me. For a moment, I was paralyzed, unsure whether I was even capable of continuing the conversation with him. Was he thinking about her now? Was everything I thought I knew about us slipping through my fingers? He noticed my hesitation, and his voice cracked again as he said, "You're thinking about her, aren't you?" I didn't even have to say anything. His voice was filled with so much guilt and uncertainty that it almost felt like he was apologizing for something he hadn't even done yet. I wanted to tell him that it wasn't her, that it was us, that we had just found something beautiful and terrifying together. But the truth was, the reality of being with him felt so much more complicated than I had ever imagined. I wanted him, desperately. But I didn't know if I could survive this messy, complicated situation that had suddenly unfolded in front of me. The silence between us stretched out longer than I could bear, and just when I thought I couldn't stand it any longer, he looked at me, his eyes filled with a raw, unguarded honesty. "I don't want to hurt you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what this is." He gestured between us, his hands trembling. "You're my best friend, and now I'm not sure where we go from here." And in that moment, I realized something that made my heart break all over again. We weren't just fighting against her. We weren't just fighting against the fear of losing each other. We were fighting against ourselves, against everything we thought we knew about who we were, about what love could look like. And in the blink of an eye, everything had shifted again. The weight of his words hung in the air, and for a few seconds, neither of us moved. My mind was a storm, swirling between the fear of losing him and the overwhelming truth that I had always known deep down. He was my everything, but nothing felt simple anymore. What had been easy, natural even, now felt tangled in a web of emotions neither of us had been prepared for. How could we go from being best friends to something more, when everything we had built was based on a foundation of secrecy and unspoken desires? I could feel the tension rising between us, the uncertainty creeping in, and then something unexpected happened. A sound, small, almost imperceptible, came from him. A quiet laugh, bitter and shaky, escaping his lips. It wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was the kind of laugh that comes when you realize you're standing on the edge of something you've always feared, but now you have no choice but to jump. "I don't know why I thought it would be easier," he said, his voice barely audible. "I guess I thought that by just pretending everything was fine, I could avoid this, but I can't. I can't keep pretending anymore." I didn't know what to say to that. I wanted to reach for him, to pull him close and tell him that I was right there, that we could make this work. But the truth was, I wasn't sure how to make sense of it all either. There was a certain rawness to his vulnerability, a depth of emotion that I hadn't seen before, and it shattered everything I thought I knew about us. This wasn't the same guy I had laughed with at 3 a.m. or shared stories of heartbreak with. This was someone completely new, someone who was admitting his own fears and insecurities out loud, and that terrified me. But then he did something that surprised me even more. He pulled out his phone, opened the message from her, and without saying a word, handed it to me. "I need you to read this," he said, his voice steady but strained. I took the phone from his hand, my pulse quickening as I read her message. "I know things have been complicated, but I can't keep pretending. I'm pregnant, and I need to know what you want to do about it." The words hit me like a slap in the face. Pregnant. She was pregnant. I didn't know how to process this sudden shift in the narrative. Everything I thought I knew about this situation had just been turned upside down. I looked at him, my breath catching in my throat. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock and fear. "I never meant for this to happen," he whispered, as though the confession was as much of a shock to him as it was to me. And in that moment, the world around us felt like it was crashing down, everything I had wanted for us slipping through my fingers. I wanted to scream, to shout at the unfairness of it all. How could this be happening? Why hadn't he told me sooner? But instead, I sat there, my heart torn between the devastating reality of his situation and the undeniable truth that I still wanted him more than anything else in the world. I had thought the kiss had sealed something for us, but now it felt like that kiss was just another beginning of something even more complicated. What did this mean for us? Was there even room for us anymore? Or had we just crossed a line that was impossible to come back from? The silence between us stretched out longer than I thought I could bear. The words hung like a dark cloud over everything. Pregnant. She was pregnant. That simple fact felt like a weight so heavy that it nearly crushed me, and I could see it in his eyes. The raw fear, the guilt, the panic, as if he had just seen everything he had ever hoped for slip away. I looked at him, and in his expression, I could feel the chaos of his own heart breaking, the very same chaos that was stirring inside me. This wasn't what either of us had expected, not in a million years. This wasn't just about me or him anymore. This was about responsibility, about consequences neither of us had anticipated, about a future neither of us could control. I wanted to reach out to him, to say something, anything, that could ease the crushing tension between us. But how could I? What could I say? Everything had changed in an instant. The fragile world we had been so carefully building, the connection that had felt like it was always meant to be, was now tangled in threads of doubt and unexpected truths. And yet, deep down, I knew something that terrified me even more than the uncertainty. I knew that despite her message, despite everything that had just been laid bare, I still wanted him. I still loved him. The realization hit me like a sudden storm, a flood of emotions that I couldn't push back, no matter how hard I tried. He looked at me as if searching for any sign that I wasn't about to walk away. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "I'm scared and I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't know how to fix this." I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I realized that I had to make a choice. It wasn't about just him or just me anymore. It was about us, about what we meant to each other and what we were willing to risk. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. It was going to be messy, complicated, and unpredictable. There was no manual for this, no guide that could tell us how to navigate the storm that had just been unleashed. But as I looked into his eyes, I knew what I had to do. I had to stay, not out of obligation or guilt, but because he was my everything. I wasn't just his friend anymore, not just the person he turned to when things got hard. I had become something else to him, and in return, he had become something far more than just a part of my life. He was my future, my heart, the one person who made the world feel like it could be more than I ever imagined. "I don't have all the answers," I said, my voice trembling with the weight of the moment. "But we'll figure this out, together." And just like that, everything shifted again. There was no magic cure, no easy solution to the mess we had found ourselves in, but in that moment we made a choice. We chose each other, and in doing so, we chose the unknown. And as the night drew on, the sound of his hand gripping mine tightly in the quiet of that park, I realized that sometimes love isn't about perfect timing or perfect circumstances. It's about holding on, no matter how impossible the path ahead may seem. Because sometimes the greatest journeys are the ones we never expected to take.